8.5 by 11. 11 is going to be your magic number. I'm going to show you how to make slant lines on your page without using a protractor, and it comes down to a few simple proportions. And the first one of these is the 11-inch edge on the left-hand side of your paper. We're going to begin by making some 5-degree slant lines on our 8.5 by 11 page. The first thing we'll do is, at the top of the page, we're going to make a little dot 1 inch from the upper left-hand corner of the page. We're going to connect that dot to the bottom corner of the page with our ruler. We'll then place our ruler next to the first line and make another line parallel to that. We're going to do the same thing, repeat it a third time, so that we'll have a third line parallel to the first two. They'll all be 5-degree slant lines. As we repeat this, all of these lines will be 5-degree slant lines, and they'll be whatever the arbitrary width is of our ruler. We'll fill the whole page this way. We'll move on to making 10-degree slant lines on our 8.5 by 11 page, and to do this, at the top of our page, we're going to come 2 inches from the corner left and make a little mark at the top of the page. We'll connect that mark at the top of the page to the bottom corner of the page with our ruler. This is going to give us a 10-degree slant line. We'll repeat what we did before in terms of putting the ruler next to the previous line and making a series of lines all parallel, 10-degree slant lines. Although I'll be showing you the 5, 10, 15, and 20-degree slant lines, it's the 10-degree I want you to focus on most because we're going to be using that in our basic italic. Let's line up an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper in real time with 10-degree slant lines. What we've done is, at the top of our piece of paper, 2 inches from the upper left-hand corner, we've made a little mark. We're going to connect that mark to the bottom corner of the page, giving us a 10-degree slant line. We're going to line against both edges of the straight edge, which will give us 2 lines that are 10-degree slant lines, parallel. We then move our ruler over next to the line we just made and repeat. All of the lines will be 10-degree slant lines, all parallel to one another. In this case, my ruler is about 1.5 inches wide, so all of these lines are going to be about 1.5 inches from each other. If the ruler were wider, they'd be further apart. If the ruler were narrower, they'd be closer together. I'm using a permanent black marker to make these so that the camera can see it. But also, if you were making a set of guidelines that you wanted to slip under a rather thin sheet of paper, and then see those guidelines through that thin sheet of paper, this is the way you would make it, with a dark marker. If you were working on a piece of paper where you would be working on the original piece of paper, drawing lines on it, you would want to do that in pencil so that you could then erase it. By having these lines very dark here, a photocopier can then make copies on a white piece of paper or a transparency, as you'll see later. We'll move on and make some slant lines that are 15 degrees on our 8.5 by 11 page. So far, we've done 5, 10, now 15 degrees. We've gone over 3 inches over here and made a mark at the top of the page. And of course, we'll connect that mark down to the bottom corner of the page. That'll give us a 15-degree slant line. Then we'll take our ruler, we'll place it next to that first line, and make another line that'll be parallel to it. Both 15-degree slant lines. We'll repeat that process. So once again, whatever the width of our ruler is, that's how wide apart our slant lines will be. A whole page of 15-degree slant lines. We'll finally move on to 20-degree slant lines on our 8.5 by 11 page, and to do that we'll go over 4 inches at the top of the page. 1 inch was 5 degrees, 2 inches 10, 3 inches 15, 4 inches 20 degrees. We've got the dot at the top of the page, and we connect that dot to the bottom corner of the page. And then once again, whatever the width of our ruler is, we put that next to the first line make the second line parallel to the first, and all lines that we make after that will be parallel to that first. 20 degrees. Let's look at another standard size sheet of paper, 11 by 17. Remember, 11's our magic number. So long as that left-hand edge of the piece of paper is 11 inches, we can keep our proportions consistent. We're going to do a 10 degrees slant line again, so we go 2 inches over from the top and make our mark. We connect that mark to the bottom corner of the page. Using the width of the ruler to continuously make the parallel lines, we fill up the page with 10 degree slant lines. Now we're going to line up a piece of paper that doesn't have an 11-inch edge. It's going to be considerably smaller, and we'll do it without using math. We'll simply take our 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that we've already lined up with 10 degree slant lines, and we'll take our small piece of paper and superimpose it atop it. We'll use our ruler to simply trace and extend those lines from the larger piece of paper down onto the smaller one, and we have our piece of smaller paper entirely lined with no math involved. Similarly, we can line up any larger piece of paper in the same way without using any math by simply taking our original 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with 10 degree slant lines on it and superimposing it on the large sheet of paper. Using our ruler, we extend those lines from the 8.5 by 11 onto the larger piece of paper until we fill the entire larger one. Once we have that done, we remove the 8.5 by 11 and extend those lines down until we have the entire larger sheet filled up with our 10 degree slant lines. Okay, now we're going to line up an entire larger piece of paper, this time using the dreaded math. Calligraphers, you may want to leave the room. We know how calligraphers and math don't mix. We're going to be laying down 10 degree slant lines. So, as we look at our larger piece of paper right here, all we have to remember is that if the left-hand edge is 11 inches, we can make a mark 11 inches down on that side. And then for 10 degrees, we can make a mark 2 inches from the top. So long as we have these proportions, 2 inches from the top, 11 inches from the side, we can lay down our ruler and have our parallel lines that are 10 degree slant lines. Then we can lay our ruler all the way across and have a series of 10 degree slant lines. Now we're going to make 10 degree slant lines on a smaller size piece of paper. Remember, on our 8.5 by 11, to get 10 degrees we went 2 inches from across the top and made a dot, and on the side we had 11 inches down, 10 degrees. On this small piece of paper, what we can do is cut those numbers in half. So at the top we can come across 1 inch and make a dot, and then on the side we can lay down our ruler and come down 5.5 inches and make a dot. Both of those are half the numbers that we had on the 8.5 by 11. We can connect the dots as we've drawn them on both sides of the ruler, and then keep coming across with the ruler, which, as I said before, mine is approximately 1.5 inches wide. I've simply come back a second time and midway between the original slant lines made a whole other set. The more slant lines you have, the more accurate your vertical letters will be in your lettering. It's a good idea to have a piece of white paper slip behind all the pages that you're actually lettering with. First you have your guide sheet. Atop that you have the piece of paper you're lettering on, maybe 20-24 pounds. But under those, have another piece of white paper. This will help greatly in seeing those lines. Always have a good light source, whatever it may be. Whether I'm working in color or black and white, I usually prefer a full spectrum light source. That way you'll be able to see the guidelines on your piece of paper all the time you're doing your lettering. Your top piece of paper, 20-24 pounds, not very thick. Your middle piece of paper, your guidelines. Beneath that, slip a piece of white paper. In doing so, the light's going to reflect off those guidelines a lot stronger, and you're going to be able to see them better and you're going to be doing your lettering more accurately on that top sheet of paper. If you do work on a light box, you find it a great advantage to turn some of these guidelines into transparencies. You can simply take your black and white to a copy shop, and there they have transparencies you can make copies onto. Make sure you have an intense black and white. Most of the time they only have 8.5 by 11s at the copy shops. You can go to office stores and get your own transparencies by the boxes. They're not cheap, but they wind up being cost effective. Make sure you get the right ones for inkjet or laser. The transparencies allow for a lot more light to come through the paper, and you can see everything much more clearly. Whether on transparencies or on paper, have fun with your newfound world of slant lines.